Welcome to a space where love isn't loud, it's lived, where connection doesn't happen all at once, but grows slowly, quietly, deeply, until it becomes something that changes everything. Here, stories aren't just told, they are felt. Love that begins where it shouldn't, desire that unfolds like a sigh between shared glances, power that softens into trust when hearts choose each other without hesitation, and intimacy that doesn't just touch skin, it reshapes the soul itself. If you've ever loved in silence, waited for courage, or held someone so gently the world disappeared, you'll understand the truth here. This channel is not about fantasy, it's about love that leaves a mark. Love that asks us to be brave, love that becomes home. So sit close, listen carefully. The story starts quietly, but it will stay with you. The first thing remembered is how ordinary everything was in the beginning. The office smelled of printer ink and coffee, the kind that sat too long on a warmer, but everyone still drank because routine mattered more than taste. Days were built from calendars, deadlines, and polite distance. Nothing about that place suggested love. If anything, it was the kind of environment designed to prevent it. Titles, positions, structure. Everything existed to keep lives neatly separated. She held a position above mine, admired, respected, maybe even feared in the quiet way people fear someone who never needs to raise a voice to be heard. There was never the intention to see her as anything but what she was, someone strong, composed, and always in control. But there's a strange truth about connection. It doesn't ask permission. It begins quietly, like a thought you don't notice until it has already taken root. The first shift happened without words, just a moment shared after most of the office had left. Papers were spread across a desk. Dim light from a desk lamp softened the sharp angles of the room, and she laughed at something small, something that didn't matter, but that laugh was warm. Real, for the first time, she wasn't a title. She was a person, tired, human, and beautiful in a way that didn't need to announce itself. There should have been distance. That would have been easy, even expected. Instead, there was curiosity, a pull. It wasn't dramatic, not a lightning strike or sudden revelation. It was slower, like two rivers quietly bending toward the same valley. Conversations became slightly longer. Not personal, not yet, just full. Words held more weight. Eyes held meaning. There were times when silence between us felt more comfortable than speech. I began noticing things not meant to be noticed. The way she steadied her breathing before delivering difficult news, the way her gaze softened when listening, the way exhaustion lived near her temples when she thought no one was looking. And the more I saw, the more something inside shifted. Love didn't arrive like a confession, it arrived like recognition. The moment I realized it, truly realized it, was something so ordinary, walking past her office door and hearing her humming faintly under her breath. It was a quiet sound, nothing special, but it warmed something deep inside me. The kind of warmth that says, without words, here is someone who matters. But wanting her was terrifying. There were rules. Not just written ones, but the unspoken kind that keep society breathing in straight lines. She was supposed to be untouchable, admired from afar, respect without intimacy. The idea of crossing that boundary felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at both the danger and the beauty of the fall. The heart, however, does not negotiate with reason. One evening, staying late to finish a report, the building was nearly silent. The city outside was alive, but inside everything felt paused. She stepped into the room, not as my superior, not as someone above me, just someone there. She asked how I was, that was all, a simple question. But something about the way she asked made the truth impossible to hold back. I'm tired, I said. 2 words, nothing more, but she understood the kind of tired I meant. She didn't tell me to be strong. She didn't give advice. She just sat beside me, close enough to feel her presence, not touching, not crossing any lines, just existing in the same breath. And that quiet was more intimate than any embrace could have been in that moment. I remember every detail of that silence, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the soft clicking of her pen, the way the lamplight turned the room gold. I remember how my chest felt too small for my heart. I remember wanting to speak and being afraid that words would break something sacred. When I finally looked at her, really looked, she was already watching. There was understanding in her eyes, not assumption, not expectation, just understanding. And that was the moment everything changed, because love doesn't begin when lips meet or hands touch. Love begins the moment being seen feels like safety instead of exposure. We didn't act on it then. Not for weeks. The world continued spinning. Work continued. Meetings, reports, schedules. Everything looked the same from the outside. But inside, something was unfolding, deep and quiet and undeniable. Every conversation felt like a thread pulling us closer. Every shared glance felt like a language that only we understood. The boundary we were not supposed to cross became less of a wall and more of a door, closed but not locked. The night it finally opened wasn't dramatic. No storm, no argument, no sudden declaration. Just the two of us walking out of the building when it was already dark, the parking lot empty, the air cool. The sky low with clouds. Words felt unnecessary. We stood close, closer than professionalism allowed. And when her hand brushed mine, it was not an accident. It wasn't clumsy or uncertain. It was gentle. Intentional, a question asked without speaking, and I answered by not pulling away. The world didn't stop, but it felt like it did. There was no rush, no urgency, just the soft, undeniable truth of two people choosing each other in a moment they could have walked away. From that night forward, love grew not out of rebellion, but out of recognition, trust, and the quiet certainty that something real had found us both. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about acknowledging something that already existed, something honest, deep, and unforced. This was not a love that demanded fireworks or declarations. It was a love that arrived like breath, natural, steady, something that felt like coming home to a feeling always known but never spoken. Some boundaries are not crossed out of recklessness. Some are crossed because the heart refuses to live half awake, and loving her meant finally choosing to live fully. The desire did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded slowly, like a candle flame growing warmer with each passing moment. At first, it was something quiet, almost unnoticeable. A shared conversation over work details, the sound of her voice while explaining a plan, the thoughtful pause she took when considering someone else's idea. There was admiration, yes, but it was gentle, safe, something that could be easily hidden behind professionalism and daily routine. But slowly, that gentleness deepened into something more tender, something that rested deeper than logic could reach. There was a pull in the space between breaths whenever she stood nearby, a heartbeat that felt slightly louder when her hand lingered near the same document, a warmth that settled beneath the ribs whenever her laughter softened the sharpness of the day. What began emotionally grew roots quietly, deeply. She had a way of looking at a person that made the world quiet, not intense or piercing, but steady, present. Her eyes held attention with a calm certainty, as if seeing not just the face, but the thoughts behind it. Each time her gaze settled in conversation, something inside became still and unguarded, like a door opening without being touched. Conversation shifted without being intentional. No longer just about work, though work was always the excuse, but about music, childhood memories, the dreams that seemed too tender to speak aloud. She shared pieces of herself with a softness that made them feel sacred. Each time something new was revealed, the connection tightened almost imperceptibly, like a thread being gently woven between two hearts. Late afternoons became moments to be treasured, not because of the tasks completed, but because of the quiet minutes afterward when the office began to empty. The air would grow soft, lights dimmer, voices from distant hallways fading. In that hush, even the smallest exchange felt like breath shared between two souls who recognized each other in ways words could not explain. Desire lived first in silence. It lived in the way the chest would tighten when she leaned close to point at something on a page, It lived in the warmth of her arm brushing near, in the scent of her perfume lingering just long enough to feel like a memory forming in real time. It lived in restraint, in the sweetness of wanting without having. There were moments when speaking became difficult, not for lack of words, but because words felt too small to hold what was happening. A simple greeting carried weight. A simple goodbye felt like leaving an entire piece of the day behind. The space between us became a place where meaning lived. One evening, while discussing a project, her hand rested near the edge of the desk, fingers curled slightly, relaxed, trusting. Something in that gesture spoke more loudly than any confession could. It felt intimate, not because of touch, but because of what wasn't touched. The distance between our hands was no more than a breath, and yet that space held the entire storm of longing, hope, fear, and inevitability. Desire often appears in the smallest of spaces. There were glances that felt like shared secrets, moments where laughter came too easily and silence felt too tender. Every time the eyes met, something inside leaned forward, drawn by a magnetism no force could push away. The body knew before the mind dared to admit it. There were nights spent lying awake, remembering the exact tone of her voice when saying something kind, the exact shape of her smile when catching someone off guard, the way she leaned back in her chair when relaxing, letting go of the weight she carried all day. The memory of her presence was enough to make the skin warm, enough to make the heart ache in the sweetest way. Desire did not ask for permission. It grew with each shared moment, with each silent understanding. It settled into the body, living beneath the skin, a quiet hum that never fully disappeared. It was not impatient. It did not demand to be satisfied. It simply existed, steady, undeniable, patient. The first physical touch was not dramatic. No sweeping motion, no sudden collapse into each other's arms. It was soft, so soft that it felt like a secret being whispered directly into the soul. A hand rested lightly on an arm, steady, grounding. The warmth of that touch moved through the body like light traveling through glass, illuminating everything quietly, deeply. There was no fear in that moment. Only recognition. The heart knew, the body knew, the air between us knew. When lips finally met, it was not a collision. It was the natural conclusion of every shared breath, every restrained longing, every quiet moment where love had already chosen itself long before either of us dared to speak. The kiss was slow, gentle, filled with a tenderness so profound it felt like being seen, understood, held without ever being asked to be different. Desire deepened into love not through intensity, but through consistency. Through the way she remembered small things never spoken twice, through the safety felt in her presence, through the warmth in her hand, never too tight, never too loose, always exactly enough. There was no rush to claim or possess. The connection asked only to be cherished, nurtured, protected. Physical closeness became an extension of emotional truth. Soft touches, lingering embraces, the quiet beauty of lying together in silence, breathing in the same rhythm, no words necessary. Every moment with her felt like learning the world again, not through logic, but through sensation, through affection, through the raw honesty of being held without conditions. This was desire that did not burn to destroy. It burned to warm, to soften, to heal, and in that warmth, love found its shape. Because some loves do not explode, they unfold, slowly, deeply, undeniably, until the heart has no memory of life without them. The shift between us did not happen in one moment. It unfolded quietly, as if the universe was rearranging itself behind the scenes while life carried on in familiar patterns. For the longest time, she was someone to respect, someone whose presence carried certainty and steadiness. There was confidence in the way she moved, spoke, and led others. People followed her not because they were told to, but because her strength made them believe in direction, purpose, clarity. In those early days, that strength was what drew me closer, even when closeness wasn't something either of us would have admitted wanting. There was admiration, yes, but admiration alone is safe. What grew was not safe. It was gentle, it was human, It was the kind of softness that reveals itself only in the quiet, private places of the heart. The first time vulnerability appeared between us, it was unintentional. She stayed late after a long meeting, exhaustion visible in the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was watching. The image of her, not composed, not guarded, not commanding, held something sacred. Something real. She didn't notice at first that I was still there. When she did not straighten herself or put her armor back on. She simply let me see her. Not the version of herself the world recognized, but the one who carried the weight of it all. That was the moment authority loosened, not because respect disappeared, but because love had begun carving out a place where equality could grow. We spoke softly that evening, not about work, but about the heaviness that comes with being responsible for others. She trusted me with thoughts she didn't share often, thoughts that did not come polished or measured, and listening to her in that moment felt like being invited into the inner room of her soul, a room with uncurtained windows and unlocked doors. Trust began there, in the quiet admission of being tired. From then on, the dynamic between us shifted without needing to be spoken. The world still saw the roles, the leader and the one who followed, but beneath that, in the space only we could feel, something else was taking shape. A place where titles meant nothing and hearts meant everything. Her strength was never diminished. If anything, it became more beautiful when touched by softness. The authority she held professionally never vanished. It simply stopped being the thing that defined her in my eyes. Instead, what defined her were the small human details, the way she listened before she answered, the way she remembered small things without trying, the way her laughter softened even the hardest days. There were moments when the world outside tried to enforce the roles, meetings where she stood at the front and I sat at the table, discussions where the tone had to be firm, direct, structured. But even then, there was a quiet thread between us, connecting us like a subtle current under the surface of everything. A glance, a pause, a slight softening of her voice when our eyes met. It was invisible to everyone else, but unmistakable to us. The closeness grew not from desire alone, but from choice. Every day, choosing to be real, choosing to show the parts that were never meant for public display. There was safety in that. A safety so profound it felt like being seen for the first time. The first time she cried in front of me was when everything changed. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no breaking points. It happened quietly, like everything between us always did. She was speaking about something from her past, something that still lived in her shoulders, in her breath, in the way she sometimes stared just beyond the present moment when lost in memory. One tear slipped down her cheek, just one, and she tried to turn away, as if showing pain would threaten the strength she was known for. But she didn't have to hide. My hand reached out, not to comfort, not to fix, but simply to be there. A gentle touch, steady, warm, honest. She didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned slightly, just enough to say without words, I don't have to carry this alone anymore. Power dissolved that day, not by force but by love. From then on, closeness felt like breathing. Not something that had to be justified or explained, just felt, just known. The world outside still expected her to lead, to be composed, to be the one who always stood firm. But in private, where her voice could soften and her guard could fall away, there was no hierarchy. Only the quiet balance of two souls choosing each other. Sometimes we spoke for hours, letting thoughts unravel and settle. Sometimes we sat in silence, sharing warmth without words. Sometimes we held each other with the kind of gentleness that made time feel irrelevant. What made love real was not what was seen from the outside, but what was shared in those wordless moments where vulnerability met trust. Love turned strength into something tender, and tenderness in return deepened strength. Because being held does not make a person weaker, it makes them whole. Loving her was never about the roles we played in the world. It was about who we became when no one was watching, when titles fell away, when expectations faded, when only truth remained. In that truth we found each other, fully, completely, quietly, undeniably. Power did not end. It simply transformed into softness, into honesty, into love that asked nothing but to be chosen, and we chose each other. Again and again, love did not come gently. It arrived quietly, yes, but when it took root, it changed everything. It asked for honesty in places where silence once felt safer. It asked for courage when staying hidden would have been easier. It asked for sacrifice, not dramatic, not tragic, but real. The kind of sacrifice that requires facing oneself fully. Before her, life felt predictable, not empty, just structured. Days followed familiar rhythms, feelings stayed neatly contained, and nothing pressed too deeply beneath the surface. But love is a force that refuses to be contained. It doesn't care for the walls built out of fear or habit. It sees straight through them, and little by little, it begins to soften them from within. The first shift was internal. There was a moment when looking at her didn't just feel like admiration or affection. It felt like recognition. As if something in both of us had known all along that we were meant to meet, but patience was needed to understand why. That recognition came with a quiet ache, the kind that says life will change if this path is chosen. Change is rarely comfortable. There were days filled with doubt, not about the feeling itself, but about the world around it. What would others think? How would this affect our lives? Could love survive outside the small, safe space we had built between us? The questions were heavy, but the heart answered with a calm certainty every time. This love is real. Honesty became the foundation. There was no room for pretending, no space for wearing versions of ourselves meant for others' approval. She saw everything, the tenderness, the fear, the longing, the strength, the trembling parts of the soul that rarely see light. And in seeing all of that, she did not turn away. She leaned closer. That closeness changed the way the world felt. Colors seemed deeper, quiet moments held meaning, even pain felt different, not empty, but something that could be held, shared, soothed. Love has a way of teaching patience, but it also asks for truth. There came a point when hiding was no longer possible, not from others, but from ourselves. Pretending the relationship was simple or temporary, or something that could be kept tucked away, became impossible. To continue loving her meant choosing to step out of the shadows, to say, with both heart and action, that she mattered more than the comfort of appearing untouched by risk. The courage required was not loud. It was steady. It lived in small decisions, telling the truth when silence would be easier, staying when fear whispered to run, reaching out when retreat felt safer. And on her side, there was courage too. She had more to lose, more to protect, more at stake. But when she chose this love, she chose with her whole being. She did not love halfway. She did not hold back pieces to protect herself. She stepped in fully, trusting that the connection we had was worth whatever the world might demand in return. That trust reshaped everything. Suddenly, we were no longer two separate lives touching gently at the edges. We were intertwined, not dependent, but deeply connected. When one hurt, the other felt it. When one laughed, the other absorbed the sound like warmth sinking into bone. When one was quiet, the other understood without needing explanation. There were sacrifices, yes. Time that once belonged to work was now shared. Choices that once were made alone now needed to be considered together. There were moments of conflict, not out of anger, but because loving someone means confronting parts of oneself that would rather stay hidden. Love reveals where the heart is strong and where it still needs to grow. There were tears, sometimes soft ones, shed in the safety of arms that never tightened in frustration, only held tighter in understanding. There were nights of talking until the stars faded into dawn, conversations that lingered in the space between vulnerability and trust, moments where silence spoke more truth than words could grasp. Intimacy grew not from physical closeness alone, but from the willingness to be seen. Truly seen, in every raw, unguarded form. Loving her meant learning that strength is not always firm, steady, or unshaken. Sometimes strength is the ability to say, I am afraid, but I will stay anyway. Sometimes it is allowing tears to fall without apology. Sometimes it is choosing softness over control, and she grew too. The woman who once carried the world on her shoulders learned how to rest, how to lean, how to breathe in someone else's presence without feeling the need to perform. Her laughter became more frequent, her posture less rigid, her eyes warmer. Love had reshaped her just as it reshaped me. We met as two people living within the expectations of others. We became two souls who finally allowed ourselves to feel freely. And the world did not fall apart because we loved each other. It expanded. Life became richer, deeper, not easier. Love is not a simple path, but profoundly more meaningful. The sacrifices were real. The courage required was constant. The honesty demanded was sometimes difficult, but love like this does not wound. It remakes, it rebuilds, it teaches the heart how to live fully awake. Loving her changed not only who I was, but who I chose to be. And I chose love. If this story touched something inside you, like, share, and subscribe. Stay close. More love waits here.